My daughter looked me in the eye and said, "You weren't invited, this is for family." I stood there with my apple pie and a deed with both our names on it. Emily used to be my baby girl. Now she was my biggest betrayal. She thought I'd walk away, like always. She didn't know I came prepared. By the end of the day, the house would be mine again, and so would my dignity. She chose her husband. I chose the truth. And this mother wasn't backing down. I'm curious, where in the world are you joining us from? Drop your city or country in the comments, and make sure you're subscribed for all the latest updates. The sun was already high, glinting off 4th of July flags fluttering lazily on front lawns. Helen stood at the edge of her daughter's walkway with a pie in one hand and a folded dish towel in the other. The scent of cinnamon and butter seeped through the foil like a memory trying to break through time. She'd baked it the night before, her apple pie, the one Emily once called the taste of home. The crust had flaked perfectly. She'd even used the old ceramic dish with the faint crack across the side. That dish had been passed down from her mother. Helen liked to think it held stories in its lines. A breeze swept through the street, and for a moment Helen hesitated. The last time they'd spoken, Emily's tone had been clipped, distant. Still, Helen had told herself this was a holiday, a day for flags, forgiveness, and starting again. She smoothed her blouse and climbed the last 2 steps to Emily's front door. Her heart tapped unevenly. When the door finally creaked open, Helen lifted the pie like a peace offering. Emily stood in the doorway, lips parted slightly, eyes blank. "Mom," she said, her voice neither warm nor surprised. Helen's smile faltered. "I thought I'd bring this pie for the picnic." Emily's eyes darted behind her, then settled back. "You weren't invited." The words didn't land at first. What? Emily's face stayed still. It's a family thing." Helen stared at her. "I am family." Emily glanced over her shoulder. Voices and laughter floated from the backyard. "It's complicated." Helen stood frozen, pie trembling slightly in her grip. Complicated. Like a recipe gone wrong. Like trying to balance love and obligation in one house. Like mother and daughter standing on opposite sides of a doorway they used to walk through together. "I didn't want to make things tense," Emily added. Softer this time. Mark thought, maybe it's just better this way. For today. Helen blinked slowly. "So he decided. And you agree?" A muscle twitched in Emily's jaw. "It's just one day." Helen stepped back. "It always starts with just one day." She turned, breath sharp, each step down the porch sounding louder than it should have. The foil crinkled in her hand. "Wait, Mom," Emily called behind her. But Helen didn't stop, not until she reached the bottom step, where she paused, needing one final glance, not at her daughter, but through the open sliver of the doorway. Her eyes caught the kitchen island. There it was, a stack of manila folders beside a bowl of red, white, blue Jell-O cups. On top of the stack, angled toward the window, was a paper she could spot from any distance. Even upside down, Helen recognized the bold black border and the gold notary seal near the bottom right corner. The deed to her house. No, their house. And there it sat, casually among picnic snacks and children's toys, exposed, like a secret not meant to be hidden anymore. Her stomach dropped. The pie felt heavier now. She turned fully, eyes locked on the paper, the foil-wrapped pie clutched to her chest like a shield. Something told her this wasn't just a family picnic. This was the beginning of an unraveling. It wasn't just about the picnic. There was something more to this rejection. And the papers I saw on the counter made me realize it was something I couldn't ignore. Helen drove home with the pie still in the passenger seat, untouched, slowly sweating beneath the foil. Her fingers clutched the wheel tighter than she realized, until her knuckles whitened. The radio played faintly, something upbeat and patriotic, but it sounded like static to her. All she could see was the notary seal glinting beneath Emily's kitchen light. The deed. Why would it be out in the open like that? Why now? And why hadn't Emily said a word? She pulled into her driveway. As the first backyard fireworks cracked through the neighborhood air, inside her house, the silence wrapped around her shoulders like an old sweater. She placed the pie on the counter, peeled off her shoes, and went straight to the filing cabinet. Second drawer, labeled real estate. She pulled the manila folder marked Sutter Lane House Purchase and carried it to the dining table, her hands moving automatically, methodical and practiced. Years of managing paperwork for herself, her late husband, And then Emily had taught her where every decimal belonged. She hadn't looked at this folder in nearly 4 years. She flipped through signatures, mortgage forms, escrow statements, until her eyes landed on the deed. Her name, Helen L. Whitaker, was there, alongside Emily's. No mark, dated, notarized, clean. But the image in her head from Emily's kitchen had shown 2 names, and one of them hadn't been hers. A chill crept up her spine. She retrieved her reading glasses, sat down and opened her laptop. It took a few tries, but eventually she found the public property records database for the county. She typed in the house address, Emily and Mark's place. Her breath hitched as the page loaded. Under ownership, it listed Emily Whitaker and Mark Forrester. No mention of Helen, not even as a co-signer. She clicked through to the most recent deed transfer, June 3rd, 1 month ago, filed, signed, notarized. Her name was gone. Gone. Helen stared at the screen. Her ears roared. She had helped buy that house, co-signed the original loan so Emily could qualify, even offered her late husband's life insurance to make up the down payment. She'd believed it was her way of building a legacy, of giving Emily the kind of stability she never had growing up. A joint investment, she'd told herself. Home for the whole family. Now her name had vanished as easily as if someone had erased pencil from paper. She reread the document's signature lines. Emily's was neat. Mark's was long and forceful, confident. Her own signature was nowhere. Helen sat back in her chair, dizzy. Her stomach churned. Not with confusion, but with something sharper, deeper. What had they done? A legal maneuver, probably. Some kind of refinancing. Maybe paperwork she'd once glanced at, trusting her daughter to explain. Or maybe something more sinister, something she'd never imagined her own child would do. Her fingers trembled slightly as she reached for her phone. She scrolled until she found the number she hadn't dialed in years, not since the estate was finalized after her husband's passing. Robert Klein, her old lawyer. Steady, no nonsense, loyal. She tapped call. It rang once, twice. Robert Klein, came the familiar voice. Robert, Helen said, her voice steady but cold. I need to meet with you. It's about the house. Robert hesitated, then answered, tomorrow morning. Bring everything you have. Helen looked down at the deed in her lap and whispered to no one, I'm not going to be erased. Robert's words were clear. There's a clause that could change everything. What clause? And why didn't I know about it? Helen arrived at Robert's office just after 9 a.m., dressed in a navy blouse and slacks she hadn't worn since her husband's memorial. It wasn't armor, but it made her feel contained. She carried 2 folders in her tote, one thick with old paperwork, another thin with betrayal. Robert opened the door himself. The office still smelled like cedar and coffee. Come in, Helen, he said, gesturing to the seat across from his cluttered desk. He looked older, grayer around the temples, but his eyes were just as sharp. She handed him both folders. Start with the newer one. He nodded, flipped through the deed copy, paused, then reached for a magnifying glass. His brow furrowed. They recorded this a month ago, June 3rd, without notifying you. She nodded. I only noticed because Emily left it sitting out, like it didn't matter if I saw it. Robert tapped the edge of the page. There's a rider here, small print, but it's there. Helen leaned in. What kind of rider? He pulled the document closer and read aloud slowly. In the event that the co-investor is determined to cause undue tension, or be disruptive to the homeowner's quiet enjoyment of the property, their financial stake may be forfeited. Helen stared. That doesn't even sound real. Robert sighed. It's unusual, sneaky, but legal if filed properly, and this one was. Her mouth went dry. They called me disruptive. They didn't need to. The clause is subjective. If challenged, it puts the burden on you to prove you weren't. Helen sat back in her chair. So they set this trap, years ago. Robert flipped back to the original paperwork from 4 years prior. This clause wasn't in the initial deed. It was amended during their second refinance. See this page? He pulled it up, showing her the signature date. I didn't sign that, Helen whispered. You weren't asked to, because by then, they'd removed you from title. That gave them full control. She covered her mouth. Her pulse beat in her ears. They planned this. Mark, he was always pushing Emily to keep finances clean. But Robert closed the folder gently. It's more than financial, it's strategic. He wanted you out not just of the house, but of her life. Helen stood up, walked to the window, then back to her chair. I helped them buy that place, gave them my husband's policy, co-signed when their credit tanked, and they treat me like a liability. Robert's voice softened. Helen, they didn't just treat you like one, they made you one on paper. Tears pressed at the edge of her eyes, but she blinked them away. So what now? We challenge. Will it hold up? It depends. If we act fast, we can argue the clause was added under false pretense. We can file an injunction to pause any sales, refinancing, or property decisions. Helen exhaled slowly. And if we lose? Robert didn't answer right away. Then we explore financial restitution. You have proof you contributed bank records, gift letters, your husband's policy, payout. It's not unwinnable, but it won't be easy. Helen nodded. I don't need easy. I need just. Robert handed her a list of documents to gather. Let's get ahead of this. We'll file by end of week. She left the office clutching her bag to her chest, heart pounding, not with fear but with ignition. The sun was high when she got to her car. She didn't turn the engine on right away. Her phone buzzed. Emily again. A single line. Can we talk? Just us. Helen stared at the screen. Her thumb hovered over reply. She didn't respond. Instead, she opened her notes app and typed 5 words. I want to see her lie. When I showed up at Emily's house, I wasn't just holding I was holding the truth, and I wasn't leaving without it. Helen parked 2 blocks away to gather herself. The July sun was already high and oppressive. She inhaled deeply, unclenched her hand from the steering wheel, and smoothed her blouse. No pie this time. Instead, she held just her folder, heavy with documents and intention. She walked up the walkway, slower, measured, each step echoing with purpose. The quiet confidence she'd found at Robert's office felt natural now, like armor she hadn't known she could wear. Emily answered the door not seconds later, mid-afternoon light bathing the porch. Her eyes widened at the sight of Helen, an almost fragile flicker of surprise, and something else, guilt, defiance. Helen, her tone was clipped. She didn't step aside. Helen met her gaze evenly. We need to talk. Inside, the house felt smaller somehow, too many memories packed beneath softer decor. Emily led her into the living room. Mark wasn't present, and that suited Helen fine. Without preamble, Helen laid out her folder on the coffee table. Papers, property records, crawl space of evidence now freed. You left this out the other day. I was looking at it. Emily's eyes flickered to the folder. I didn't realize it wasn't addressed to you. Helen leaned forward. Why? Why remove my name from the deed? Emily's shoulders tensed. Look, we did what made sense financially. That wasn't your call. Helen's voice quivered slightly, strain contained. I helped you buy this house. I signed. I funded. Hell, I risked my own inheritance for you two. Emily looked away. Things changed, and you think spitting me out of that house would fix something? Helen's fingers flexed around the folder. There, defensiveness brewing. Emily stood. Mark said it would give us clarity, make everything clean between us. I didn't want to hurt you. Helen's laugh came harsh. Clean, so I became clutter. Emily flushed. That's not fair, Mom. I needed independence. Helen pressed on. Independence from me, from my support, from who I am. Her voice cracked. Anger and grief, meeting friction. Was this about breaking free, or breaking me? Emily's eyes glistened. She swallowed. It's not that simple. Helen leaned back. Then tell me what is. Emily inhaled sharply. I've been suffocating, Mom, not by what you gave, but what you expected. Always expecting me to stay close, to follow rules, to stay your daughter. Helen's chest twisted. This was more than real estate. It was years of restrictive love, boiled into a single sentence. Emily's face went pale, thin edge of regret, opening beneath anger. And Mark, Emily's voice trembled. He said this would solve everything, that I could finally be my own person, told me I had to separate the financial tie to you, or I'd never be free. Helen stared. He manipulated you. Tears welled in Emily's eyes. I thought I needed to do it for me. Helen's heart shifted. Betrayal, yes, but regret too. And pain. She stood, voice low but certain. I'm not going to be erased, and I won't let him erase me, or what I stood for. She paused. So I'm taking the deed. Emily recoiled. Her face drained color, eyes wide. Instinctively, her hand went to her chest, as if to steady a breaking heart. "Mom, please," but Helen tilted her head, unwavering. "You may have taken my name off the paperwork, but you didn't erase what I built. I'm taking what's mine." Emily's breath caught. She bit her lip as the room expanded with silence. "In custody or court," Helen said softly. "I'm not stepping away." Emily sank onto the couch, speechless. Her expression shifted slowly from defiance to fear. Then Helen stood in that room. No pie, no apologies accepted yet, but with resolve that felt righteous and irrevocable. Emily swallowed, looking smaller now, less as a daughter, more as a shady architect of betrayal. Helen turned to leave, but before stepping out the door paused and asked quietly, "What else have you taken?" "I was done being the victim. I left that house with a pie, but I walked away with something far more valuable, my control." Helen's hands shook slightly on the steering wheel. As she pulled out of Emily's driveway, the deed rested heavy in her tote at her feet, a symbol she'd been stripped of, now hers again. Firework booms punctuated the afternoon sky, red and gold blooms of joy elsewhere, but to Helen they felt distant. She exhaled the tight knot in her chest. She'd taken her power back. The rest of the drive home passed in near silence, radio off, thought on repeat. Helen imagined the future not as a series of hopes, but as possibilities she owned. The house might become a battleground, but at least she wasn't defenseless anymore. Entering her kitchen, she placed the deed on the table beside her purse. The surface seemed smaller now, cluttered by memory. She pushed it aside, sat at the edge, and folded her hands, steadying herself. The faint echo of that confrontation still pulsed under her skin. Her phone vibrated on the counter. Ethan, Emily's younger brother, someone she trusted once. She stared at his name. Thumb paused over the screen, then answered. "Helen," his voice came low. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I didn't realize how twisted Mark was getting, how much he'd isolated you." His tone cracked. "I should have stood up." Helen listened, the hurt sharper than anger. Ethan's apology sounded small compared to the breach she felt from Emily, and from a son who'd stayed silent. "Why now?" she asked quietly. "I'm waking up," he said, voice bleeding regret. "I never wanted to hurt you." She let the silence stretch. Forgiveness wasn't on the table yet, not with just a call. "I need time," she said simply, and ended the call. She placed the phone face down, heart still racing. That apology felt too late, too little. Helen rose and walked to her filing cabinet. She pulled out her copy of the deed again, smoothing it over. It was crisp, new names bold, but she noticed blank space where her name once rested. Her stomach twisted, nostalgia mixed with determination. This paper was her past erased, but she'd reclaimed it. Now came the real test. She sat at the kitchen table and opened a fresh teacup. Hot water steamed between her palms. She closed her eyes and let her mind drift across years. The surgeries she'd covered, the childcare she'd managed, the tax forms, the late-night calls, everything she'd given as love, now rendered invisible in a single legal maneuver. Tears came unbidden, tears of exhaustion and mourning, not for her house, but for what it represented. Devotion dismissed. She pulled her phone back and called Robert. No ring wasted. "Robert," she said, voice firm, "I'm ready. Let's begin moving forward." They spoke in clinical tones about filings, deadlines. Robert outlined next steps, gathering bank statements, financial transfers, evidence of her contributions, everything to build a bulletproof case. Helen hung up and sat still. The legal path ahead was steep. It might cost her sleep, money, memories, but the cost of silence had become higher. She flipped through an old journal at the table, handwritten entries from when Emily was small, from the day the house closed, from birthdays spent rounding up grandchildren crumbs. Her handwriting trembled on the page, but the words stood clear. "I built this with love, and I still can hold it." She closed the journal and stood. She moved to the window, watching neighbor families loading picnic gear. She felt neither resentment nor longing, just the house deed lay nearby, waiting, power at last, in her hands. Then she noticed an envelope, subtle on the table, addressed to Emily, but fronted in her kitchen. Her name absent, but present, because she still felt a connection through omission. She looked closer, eyebrows raising. The return address was from the bank. Her heart thundered. That letter hadn't been there this morning. She stared at it, every possible implication racing through her mind.
Helen reached for the envelope, fingertips brushing the crease, and felt the weight of what that letter could mean. The fight wasn't just legal anymore, it was deeper, and maybe worse. It hadn't even begun yet. The letter from the bank wasn't just an inconvenience, it was the key to the final piece of the puzzle. Helen unfolded the envelope slowly, already bracing herself. The bank's logo glared from the top of the page, official and uncaring. She hadn't touched it for more than a few seconds, yet her hands felt sticky, as if the truth it held had already sunk through her skin. She scanned the top paragraph. The words weren't dramatic, but they didn't have to be. Loan pre-approval, refinance proceedings initiated, co-owner release confirmed. The key phrases hit like dropped bricks. The refinance was already underway. Without her, Helen flipped to the second page. There was a closing date circled, August 10, and a projected net profit. Her throat dried. There it was, in black and white. Emily and Mark hadn't just cut her out. They were preparing to cash in. The math was brutal. They'd used her financial foundation to build a house of paper, and now they were walking away with the whole profit. Helen's name, her contributions, her past scrubbed out like a line mistake. Her phone nearly slipped from her fingers as she snapped pictures of every page and sent them to Robert. "This changes everything. Call me now," he replied instantly. She died.
Robert, she said, as soon as he answered. It's worse than we thought. He didn't even ask her to explain. That letter gives us our window. They're finalizing a profit-driven refinance. It's real estate fraud if they knowingly omitted you as a stakeholder. We file for an emergency injunction tonight. Helen pressed a hand to her temple. How fast do we need to move? If that house closes before we file, you'll be chasing cash that's already spent. But now, you have leverage. We freeze this now. We expose everything. I'll prepare the filings. You need to sign in person. Do it, she said. Tonight, after the call, Helen placed the letter next to the deed, her old journal, the insurance payout receipts. A timeline was forming. A trail of good faith manipulated into a plan. They hadn't just forgotten her. They'd planned around her absence. She sank into the kitchen chair, chest aching, not from fear but clarity. She'd spent decades giving Emily everything: childcare, groceries, emotional labor. But this letter proved it wasn't forgetfulness. It was design. Mark had turned her into a stepping stone. Emily had walked across her. Her eyes lingered on the closing date, August 10, 5 weeks away. But her case wouldn't be built in weeks. It had already begun. Right now, she looked out the window. Same street, same sunlight. But nothing felt familiar anymore. The distance between her and Emily had become structural, not emotional. And yet, even now, part of her waited for a knock, a tearful apology, a daughter she once knew. Her phone buzzed again. Emily. Helen stared at the screen. That name used to bring comfort. Now it bristled with consequences. She answered. Mom? Emily's voice was thin. I saw your text, she continued. The bank letter. I didn't mean for it to get ugly. Helen said nothing. Emily tried again. We weren't going to sell without telling you. We were figuring things out. Helen's tone was calm. While removing my name, finalizing profit projections, Emily exhaled. It wasn't meant to be cruel, but it was. A pause. I want to explain. Helen nearly laughed. I don't want explanation. I want truth. Emily began, but Helen cut her off. You're about to hear from my attorney. Whatever future you pictured, it's changed. Emily's breath hitched. Are you really doing this? I already did. Helen ended the call. She stood and walked toward the living room, documents in hand, resolve in her chest. No more confusion. No more waiting for someone to rescue her. She had signed away years without realizing it, but she wouldn't surrender one more day. Then another ring. Not from Robert, not from Ethan. Emily again. But this time, she wasn't calling to apologize. Helen let the phone ring. Her finger hovered above the screen. This call wouldn't be a surrender. It would be a standoff. I wasn't sure if I could ever forgive Emily, but maybe this was my chance to get the truth. Once and for all. Helen sat alone at the cafe's corner table, stirring her tea without purpose. The busy hum around her, espresso machines steaming, chairs scraping, low chatter, felt distant, like it belonged to another life. A week ago, she wouldn't have stepped foot here without routine. She hadn't expected to come today, but when Emily's text offered a real conversation, quiet hope fluttered, cautious. Her phone buzzed. She took a breath and set it aside. She wouldn't glance. Emily arrived moments later. She wore a pale cardigan, eyes downcast, hands wringing a small clutch. Helen noticed immediately how strangely smaller Emily looked. Unmoored, tentative. Emily straightened, met Helen's eye. "Thank you for coming," she whispered. Helen nodded, palms warm on her mug. "Let's talk." Emily inhaled. "Mom, I'm sorry. For everything. The secrecy. The house. The pain." Her voice cracked as she exhaled. "It was never meant to hurt you like this." Helen watched her. Part of her stayed guarded. Logical words aren't enough. But another part, older, more tender, yearned to hear the rest. Emily continued, softer. "Mark, he pushed the refinancing plan. Told me it was about independence. About starting fresh. Said if I didn't go along, I was holding us back. I believed him. I believed him over you." She shook her head. Tears spilled. "I feel like I traded our bond for an illusion." Helen's throat tightened. It wasn't untrue. Not entirely. But betrayal wasn't erased by confession. Emily pressed her hands to the table. "I was afraid you'd see me differently, or worse, judge me. I thought keeping you out of it would protect you." Helen's lips pressed raw. Did she protect herself? By turning away? Emily swallowed. "I missed so many chances to talk things through. I shut you out instead. That was on me." Helen leaned back. She studied Emily's face. Regret, shame, remorse, all shifting, like shadows. But she didn't soften yet. "You were manipulated," Helen said finally. "That doesn't mean it wasn't your choice." Emily nodded slowly. "I made mistakes. I know that. But I'm willing to try to fix them. I want to rebuild if you'll let me." Helen's heart fluttered. Hope and fear. Could she be naive again? Vulnerable. "You want reconciliation?" she asked. "Yes." Emily's voice was raw. "But I know words won't fix trust. I need to earn it. And I'll accept whatever you decide." Silence. Stretched. Helen picked up her tea. Sipped. The warmth seeped beneath her skin. "I need time," she said after a breath. "Not promises. I need proof. Consistency over weeks. Truth. Not explanation." Emily nodded. Tears glistened. "I'll show you." Helen paused. She hadn't believed promises in years. But this moment felt different. Genuine. Maybe. Painful. Certainly. But real. They finished their drinks. The sunlight moving across the table, until their hands passed empty cups. No grand embrace. No forced closure. Just two women. Mother and daughter, unsteady but honest. As they stood, Emily offered to walk Helen to her car. Helen declined. "We'll see," she said softly. Emily nodded, lips trembling, and turned away slowly, leaving Helen alone in the hum of the cafe. Helen exhaled. The conversation had ended, but the war hadn't. It had shifted. She'd laid down conditions, exchanged real words instead of letters and lawsuits, but nothing was resolved. She left the cafe and walked under the late sun. Each step measured. She felt older, more cautious, but oddly lighter, like a stitch had been pulled. Though torn, maybe something could heal. Her phone buzzed once. A message from Emily. "Thank you. I know it's not enough yet." Helen looked at it. Should she reply now? Or wait? Saying anything could feel like acceptance. Or surrender. She set the phone aside, her finger hovering. Helen stared at the screen. Reconciling would require patience, proof, and perhaps pain. But before she could respond, the door behind her chimed softly. Emily's brother, Ethan, stood in the cafe entrance, eyes locked on her. He had something to say, and she knew it could change everything again. The decision to take legal action wasn't easy, but it was necessary. "I wasn't going to let anyone steal what I had worked for." Helen sat across from Robert, the weight of the last few weeks pressing down on her shoulders. The cafe meeting with Emily had cracked something open, but not enough. Apologies didn't reclaim titles. Regret didn't pay back what was taken. "I want to move forward," she said, voice steady. "Officially." Robert nodded. "Then we file to contest the deed, transfer and freeze any sale activity. Once we submit, it puts the bank and them on notice."
Helen exhaled slowly. This wasn't about revenge. It was about recognition. She pulled out the folder she now carried everywhere. The original deed, insurance payouts, receipts, email threads, even photos of birthday parties, hosted in the very house she'd co-signed for. Her proof. Her case. By late afternoon, the first round of filings was complete. That night, sleep didn't come easily. Helen lay awake, the quiet hum of her ceiling fan filling the silence. She kept thinking about what this battle might cost. Emily's voice trembling in the cafe, Ethan showing up with his own regrets. And now, the certainty that Mark wouldn't go quietly. And he didn't. 2 days later, Mark called. No greeting, just venom. You had no right, he snapped. This was settled. Helen didn't flinch. It was never yours to settle. He scoffed. You're tearing this family apart over a house. No, she replied. You did that the moment you tried to erase me. He hung up. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was charged. Robert kept her informed. The bank had acknowledged the injunction. The title was temporarily frozen. And the court date was set. But a new wrinkle came just days later. They've retained counsel, Robert said over the phone. Not the family friend kind. This one's sharp. Expensive. They're gearing up. Helen's stomach dropped. Emily too? She signed the retainer with him. Together, Helen sat at her kitchen table, her hands folded over her lap. There was a time she knew every twitch in Emily's face, every inflection in her laugh. Now they sat on opposite sides of a legal divide. She spent long nights organizing evidence, journals, digital backups, timeline notes. Even Ethan had begun sending messages offering to testify. He'd seen conversations, remembered things Helen had long buried. She thanked him, but kept her boundaries firm. Her body felt the toll. Mornings were stiffer, her eyes puffy from sleeplessness. But she moved with a purpose. She had given too much to be written out quietly. Each court document filed felt like reclaiming an inch of herself. She wasn't just protecting equity. She was defending decades of devotion no one had ever thought to name. Then came Robert's next call. His voice was measured. But they're countersuing, claiming you never held equity, only gifted funds without condition. They're painting you as a meddler, unwanted, unneeded. Helen laughed, bitter and quiet. So I'm a charity case now. You're a threat, Robert corrected. And they're getting scared. She stared at the papers spread across her table, then at the framed photo on her wall. Emily, age 10, smiling on their old front porch. Helen touched the edge of the glass. I'm not afraid, she said. The next morning, Helen opened her mailbox to find a thick envelope from Emily's lawyer, not addressed to her, addressed to the estate of Helen L. Whitaker. Her hands trembled. They weren't just trying to erase her name. They were trying to erase her entire. I thought the battle was just about the house, but it quickly became much more personal. I wasn't just fighting for property. I was fighting for my place in the world. The envelope lay on Helen's dining table like a threat dressed in legalese. The estate of Helen L. Whitaker, as if she were already dead, as if she no longer existed, beyond the fine print they tried to bury her under. Robert called minutes later. They've brought in Kathleen Bryce, he said. Real estate litigator. Ruthless. Expensive. They're escalating. Helen stared out her window, the spring light unforgiving against her skin. So be it, she murmured. Robert sighed. She'll dig through everything, try to paint you as unstable, overreaching, vengeful. Helen's voice was flat. Let her. What startled Helen most wasn't the attorney's name, or the countersuit language. It was knowing her own daughter had hired her, not under duress, not with apology, but as a conscious strategy to win. That night, sleep eluded her. She sat in bed with her old journals stacked like armor beside her. One entry caught her eye. 1998. Emily's first year in college. Sent grocery money again. She didn't ask, but I knew she needed it. There were pages like that. Dozens. Help given without condition. Love offered like bread. And now, that same daughter stood behind someone who'd mailed Helen her own obituary. Still living. Still breathing. Still fighting. By morning she met Robert at his office, with a new resolve. He laid out a tactical path, discovery demands, financial disclosures, and evidence chain. Then he paused. There's another way to fight this, he said. Emily and Mark's financials are shaky. The house was built on your credit, Your insurance payout. If we push that angle, prove it was never just a gift. It changes the power dynamic. Helen nodded. Let's pull every thread. As the filings grew, so did the distance between Helen and Emily. Once warm texts turned clipped. Simple messages. Please stop, or you're hurting us. Felt more like commands than pleas. There was no warmth anymore. No mother or daughter. Just party, just adversaries. Mark's threats came quietly, through suggestion, tone, implication. One afternoon he passed Helen in the grocery store, his smile tight. Litigation's expensive, he said. You sure you've got the stamina for it? Helen didn't flinch. You sure you want to find out? She walked away without waiting for his reply. The pressure mounted. Depositions loomed. Legal fees stacked. Still, Helen stood firm. Late one night, she sat with her tea, looking out at the bare magnolia tree in her front yard. She'd planted it with her late husband, 30 years ago. It hadn't bloomed in 2 seasons. Still, she watered it. Still, she waited. I raised a daughter, she whispered to the silence. Not a litigant. But the silence answered back with only her own heart. The next morning, she stepped out for the paper and found something else on her porch. A small brown parcel. No return address. Inside, a folded piece of Emily's stationery, worn at the edges. Her handwriting shaky but familiar. Helen unfolded it, breath tight. Mom, the letter began. If I told you the truth about everything, I'm not sure you'd ever speak to me again. But I can't hold this anymore. There's something I never told you. Something Mark did before all of this began. Helen's hand trembled as she. The ink was faded in one corner, smudged by what looked like a tear. But the final line was clear. If I disappear, you'll know why. The letter from Emily was full of guilt, but it wasn't until the last line that everything clicked into place. What I read changed the entire game. Helen unfolded the letter like it might crumble in her hands. The stationery was pale blue, Emily's favorite from college, but the familiar script had lost its elegance. The lines were crooked, ink pressed hard in places, shaky in others. Mom, I don't know where to begin. I've made mistakes, terrible ones, and I don't expect forgiveness. But I can't keep holding this in. Not anymore. Helen's fingers trembled. She sat down slowly. The letter angled in the sunlight slicing through her kitchen window. Mark convinced me that keeping you out of the refinance was for the best. He said we needed control, that involving you would make things harder for our family's future. I believed him. Or maybe I wanted to. It was easier than confronting the truth. Helen's jaw tightened. Easier for a daughter who didn't want to feel guilty about biting the hand that had fed her for decades. But it got worse. When we started preparing the new loan, he told me to sign a document that removed your name completely. I didn't ask questions. I didn't read all of it. I just signed. Helen pressed the page to her chest, breath caught between fury and heartbreak. So it was true. Her name wasn't just left off. It was erased. Intentionally. Quietly. You trusted me, and I gave that trust to him instead. Tears prickled behind Helen's eyes, but she didn't let them fall. Not yet. The next paragraph changed everything. There's more, and I haven't known how to say it. Mark isn't who you think he is. He's not just controlling, he's dangerous. There were nights I wanted to leave, but he'd say things, make threats. About you. About Ethan. About himself. Helen's hand flew to her mouth. I didn't speak up sooner because I thought I was protecting you. But I see now. I was protecting him. The final line struck like thunder. If anything happens to me, or if I disappear, you'll know why. Helen stared at the page. The smudge near the signature wasn't just a blot. It looked like a teardrop. One that dried too fast. One that said more than the words ever could. She rose slowly and looked around her home. Every picture, every shadow of memory, now felt altered. The house she helped buy had become a stage for betrayal and maybe something darker. She opened the drawer where she kept her legal file, tucked the letter in between the deed and the refinancing records. She could take it straight to Robert. It was evident. It could dismantle Emily and Mark's case completely. But she hesitated, because beneath the betrayal was something more dangerous. A plea. Emily was trapped. Maybe too late. Maybe not. Helen poured herself tea with trembling hands. She sat, stared out at the yard where Emily once learned to ride her bike. She remembered the scraped knees, the birthday cakes, the whispered secrets under quilts. Where had that girl gone? And now here she was, writing a confession like a woman already halfway gone. The phone buzzed. Emily, did you read it? Please don't do anything yet. I need to talk to you first. Alone. Helen didn't reply. Not yet. Then the doorbell rang. She froze. Not the phone. Not the mail. Someone was here. Helen stepped toward the door, letters still clutched in her hand. Whoever waited outside might be her daughter, or someone far worse. And this time, opening that door could change everything. The truth had always been buried beneath layers of lies, but now the unraveling had begun. I couldn't undo the damage, but I had a chance to take control. Helen lingered in her living room, the doorbell's echo still resonating in her bones. The letter lay open on the coffee table, Emily's trembling handwriting etched into her memory. Reading it again, the emotional weight settled like stones in her chest. Her daughter had chosen Mark. The realization cut deeper than any legal move. She recalled the sacrifices co-signing the mortgage, scrambling to pay gaps in their finances, quietly footing medical bills, meals prepared, babysitting, endless encouragement. Yet instead of gratitude, she'd been erased, her name removed, her contributions treated like a liability. The betrayal felt surgical, precise, not a mistake, but a calculated removal. And yet Helen had the woman who once let Emily stay in her safety zone, had transformed into someone who demanded respect. She inhaled slowly, letting clarity edge out sorrow. She was done being passive. She had a meeting, one that couldn't wait. Helen parked in front of Mark's law office, a small brick building downtown. She carried only a file and a quiet determination. When she entered, the receptionist glanced up but said nothing as she led Helen into the waiting area. Mark was already there, suited, composed, eyebrows raised at the unexpected arrival. "Hello, Helen," he greeted, greeting strained, unscheduled. Helen sat across from him, placing her folder gently on the polished desk. "No, it wasn't." Mark cleared his throat. "Your attorney filed documents. Why are you here?" She leaned slightly forward. "Because there's something you didn't count on, that your actions would bring me here." He frowned. "This is legal territory. I suggest discussing through counsel." "No," she said calmly. Her voice was subdued but firm. "I'm here because you minimized my role in Emily's life, and in that house. I need to look you in the eye and tell you your threats and your manipulation don't intimidate me." He opened his mouth, closed it. "You're making a scene." "Not a scene," Helen corrected. "A stand." She tapped the file. "You removed my name from the deed. You plotted a refinance. You called me a problem without ever facing me. Doesn't that strike you as personal?" Mark's face paled. "You misunderstand our intent." "I understand perfectly," she said. "You saw me as expendable, but I've reclaimed what's mine." She rose slowly. "Consider this your warning." He remained seated, stunned. Helen moved to leave, but paused, turning back once more. "I'm not backing down," she said quietly. "Not now. Not ever." Afterward, she walked to her car in fluttering vertigo. She'd confronted Mark without legal intercession. It felt electrifying and exhausting. Her hands shook as she started the engine. She drove in silence, haunted yet alive. At home, she paused by her magnolia tree, still bare. She planted it years ago with her late husband. It hadn't bloomed in ages, but she'd continued watering, waiting. That waiting felt symbolic now. Inside her house, she dropped onto her sofa, breathing raggedly. The emotional toll registered in her bones. Grief, anger, homesickness, and a fierce resolve. She caught sight of the framed photo of Emily at 10, their warmth captured in a single moment. She touched the frame gently, whispering, "I know who she was." She opened her file again. The legal documents awaited depositions, witness lists, financial statements, and Emily's confession. Over weeks, she'd built a fortress around truth and evidence. Now it stood ready. Her phone buzzed. Caller ID Robert. She hit answer.
"Robert? Helen, I have good news. The judge has moved our hearing up. They want to hear the case sooner than anticipated." Helen exhaled, relief tangled with dread. "They're going public." He responded. "Yes. Get ready." She stood, the weight of the world shifting under her feet. The quiet house seemed to hum with possibility and peril. Helen realized the confrontation with Mark had changed everything. She had moved her fight from papers and threats into human territory, and it had rattled him. The path ahead would test her emotionally, legally, physically. She felt vulnerable, Yes, but stronger than she'd been in years. She glanced around at the evidence-lined table, the unopened letters, her journals, and the magnolia tree outside. She understood now this was bigger than a house. It was about her place in the story, her inheritance of dignity and self-worth. And as she stood in that trembling moment, she knew the game had advanced. The next morning, Helen stepped onto her porch to retrieve the mail and found two items. One, a letter marked urgent, Judge's Chambers, and second, a package with no return address. A key lay beside it, and scrawled on the top, "For Truth's Unlock." Her fingers froze. This fight was about to open doors she hadn't expected, and maybe traps she hadn't foreseen. The game had come to its ultimate conclusion, but nothing prepared me for what I found out next. It wasn't just about winning anymore. It was about survival. Helen sat in Robert's office the morning before court, her folder open like armor. The evidence was meticulously arranged. Emily's confession letter, bank statements showing her insurance payout, notarized deeds, journal entries detailing financial contributions. She'd rehearsed her understanding of the timeline until each fact felt familiar under her tongue. Robert leaned forward, his voice steady. "The judge has confirmed the hearing for tomorrow. We're presenting your motion for full title reinstatement and damages. Be ready for cross-examination. They're likely to challenge your intent, claim your contributions were gifts." Helen nodded once. Then we'll prove intent, she thought. Every deposit, every email. Late that night, Helen received a text from Emily. "Mom, can we talk before tomorrow? I'm so sorry." It made her heart tighten. They'd drifted into shadows before, and maybe reconciliation still had a spark, but not today. She replied, "Talk after. Let tomorrow finish first." On the morning of the hearing, Helen arrived early at the courthouse. The marble hallways smelled faintly of polish and paper. She clutched her documents, matching the chill in the room with the fire in her gut. Entering the courtroom, she saw Mark already seated at the defense table, his suit crisp, shoulders square. His lawyer glanced at her. No recognition, only preparedness. She took her seat at the plaintiff's table beside Robert. The judge entered, robes rustling. Helen's pulse steadied into purpose. The proceedings moved swiftly. Emily's lawyer challenged the authenticity of her contributions, suggesting she'd relinquished equity voluntarily. But Robert countered, laying out a concise bullet train of proof: co-signed mortgage, bank transfer records, thank you notes from financial advisors, journal entries, clear intent to preserve Helen's stake. When Mark's attorney questioned Helen's motivation, "Why pursue this now?" she answered with calm precision, "I pursued it because I existed in their narrative only as long as I was useful. This is about reclaiming my place, not vengeance, but recognition." Mid-trial, a surprising twist emerged. As Robert presented newly discovered documents, it came to light that Emily had quietly funded additional renovations, using joint credit lines Helen had never known existed. Worse, a concealed trust set up under Emily's name held accounts intended to receive proceeds of a future sale, completely bypassing Helen. Helen's chest clenched. That secret trust tarnished any facade of innocence. It proved the scheme extended far beyond a simple refinance. It was a full extraction. Robert stood, voice measured. "Your Honor, I move to have this trust agreement examined and invalidated as part of the equitable distribution for Helen." He submitted the document. Gasps echoed quietly in the gallery. Emily's face flushed pale. Mark looked surprised, maybe even regretful, though he masked it quickly. Helen allowed herself a moment to feel relief, but also grief. Emily's betrayal had been deeper than she'd seen. There was no innocence here, only omission and design. As closing statements neared, Helen stood. With quiet force, she summarized, "I built that house out of love. I funded it with trust. And for years I thought what I gave was protected by goodwill. I've learned now it must be defended in court. This fight isn't about property. It's about seeing the person you raised, reflected in her own actions. And I'm not invisible anymore." She sat down and looked at Emily briefly, eyes searching, uncertain. The judge adjourned to consider the case. As the courtroom emptied into hallways lined with dark wood, Helen felt unexpectedly light. She'd shown up as more than a wronged mother. She'd become her own advocate. Then her phone buzzed softly. It wasn't her phone, it was Robert's silent tone that drew her attention. He approached quietly and pressed the device into her palm. On the screen, "Incoming call, private caller." Helen stared at it, heart tightening again. She hadn't expected this. Whoever was calling wasn't Emily, and it wasn't Robert. The caption read silent, but the weight thundered. She looked toward the street through the courtroom window, the sunlight drifting across polished floors. Her world felt suspended. Everything had led to this moment. One phone ring, one unknown voice could change it again. Helen pressed the green button. The voice on the line said only 4 words. "We know everything, Helen." And then, click. I thought I knew everything about Emily and Ethan, but when a figure from Emily's past surfaced, everything I believed shattered. Helen trudged through the courthouse lobby, heart thundering, still reeling from the private caller message. She barely registered her surroundings until Robert gently steered her into the hallway near the exit. He carried a file she'd never seen. "New development," he said quietly. "We dug deeper after today. There's proof of external involvement. A business associate of Emily's from before Mark." Helen's chest tightened. She pictured Emily's sparse trust fund, vague renovations, none of it adding up. Now there was someone else pulling strands. Robert opened the folder. Inside were bank records, transaction logs, and correspondence. This isn't just internal maneuvering. Emily and Mark funneled money through offshore accounts linked to this associate, someone Emily met during her early career. He helped structure the refinance and facilitate sale preparations. Helen's vision narrowed. So the scheme ran deeper than they let on. Robert nodded. Exactly. And worse, the associate's name appears on communications planning timeline. August sale, property exit strategy. Helen's blood turned cold. It had felt intentional before. Now it was conspiratorial. That evening, Helen sat in the quiet house. The magnolia tree outside was silhouetted against the dusk. She held the documents like evidence of a new betrayal. An associate, a stranger yet not someone she'd been fixed by, had helped orchestrate betrayal. Her daughter wasn't merely manipulated. She'd co-conspired. When her phone buzzed again, she flinched. It was Emily, but Helen chose to wait. Instead, she dialed Robert. "What now?" she asked softly. "We confront," he said. "You need to demand an explanation. Confront Emily with the evidence before court. She needs to acknowledge the external hand." Helen stared at the stack of papers. External hand. Betrayal multiplied. The next morning, Helen drove to Emily's house, the scene of her unraveling. She carried only the file. Her resolve deepened. The sky was overcast, the sun hiding. She knocked on the familiar door. It opened slowly. Emily's eyes were cautious, guarded. Without greeting, Helen stepped inside. "We need to talk," she said, voice even. They led themselves into the kitchen. It felt eerily quiet. No clatter, no proof jars, just hollow stillness. Emily watched as Helen spread out documents, bank records, emails, transaction charts. Emily's voice trembled. What is that?" Helen met her gaze. "This offshore transfers. Emails to someone from your past. You didn't just authorize refinance. You enlisted help." Emily stiffened. He's an old mentor when I worked at that consulting firm. We consulted on financial strategy. I thought it was support." Helen shook her head. "Support? You hid this from me. Loans, profits, sale plans, planned months ago. You invited a third party into our family fight." Emily's face crumpled. She exhaled, tears forming. "Mark said it would protect me, insulate our finance. He said the associate knew legal loopholes. They'd keep paperwork neat. I thought it was legal. I never meant to hurt you." Helen's grip tightened on the folder. "You meant to remove me entirely." Emily nodded, grief breaking through. "I signed documents divorcing your name." He structured everything. I was vulnerable. Helen flinched. A rush of pity and rage. Betrayal that cut through layers. This was no longer just property. It was family sovereignty corrupted. She paused, absorbing the betrayal. "So this associate," she said softly. "He's the architect." Emily nodded, head bowed. Everything shifted after he entered the picture. Helen exhaled long. She closed her folder. "Thank you for honesty, but I'm not sure you're free of blame." Their eyes locked, mother and daughter fractured. But honest. Later Helen sat at her table, phone in hand. Robert called. "They're accelerating. The associate's involvement strengthens our argument. Equitable relief, fraud claims, conspiracy. We must file motions today." Helen's throat tightened. Adrenaline mixed with grief. "We'll do it," Robert continued.
Your path forward is clear, but so is the emotional cost. This hits deeper. Is that okay? Helen breathed. Yes. I'd rather know than stay blind. That night, Helen revisited her journal, her handwriting scarred across pages describing support given love without conditions. She felt shame for never seeing deeper, but she also felt fierce clarity. This wasn't naivete. It was manipulation. She knew the emotional fallout would be severe. Emily wouldn't just risk a house. She risked losing herself. But Helen now had leverage. Proof the scheme extended beyond mother-daughter. And that changed everything. The next morning, Helen arrived at Robert's office. The final file thick with evidence. She felt ragged, determined, something newly resilient. Robert looked up. Court's timeline moved. We file before noon. They could attempt to force sale tomorrow. Helen's voice wobbled. Let's lock it down. He sighed, appreciative. This changes our trajectory. We're no longer responding to them. We're pushing them. Helen watched the envelope stack, jurisprudence waiting at the threshold. As she left the office, she noticed a man in the street across the block watching her. He wore a suit and smartphone pressed to his ear. She didn't know if he was friend or foe. Her heartbeat settled. She'd just opened the game board. Before she reached her car, her phone chimed. A message from an unknown number. He's closer than you think. Her breath, the hidden truth had surfaced. And now the fight was more dangerous than she ever expected. I wasn't sure if I could ever forgive Emily. But maybe this was my chance to get the truth. Or draw the line once and for all. Helen arrived at Emily and Mark's house, dressed in gray, unbreakable. She carried 2 binders, one thick with financial evidence, the other Emily's confession letter and Robert's new documents. No neutral territory existed today. Emily opened the door, eyes red-rimmed, lips quivering. Mark stood behind her, mask practiced and Helen paused in the threshold, exhaling a strength birthed in betrayal. I requested this meeting to speak with both of you, she began. Her voice was soft but firm, carrying every hurt and every decision she'd made. I'm here now. They led her into the dining room. Mark's lawyer hovered silently. Emily sat slowly, her shoulders curling in. Helen laid both binders on the table and opened them like a courtroom. Emily cleared her throat. Mom, I'm sorry. Helen lifted a hand. Save. She flipped to the first document. Offshore account transfers, emails outlining sale planning, trust documents. You enlisted someone to help you erase me. This wasn't innocent. Mark opened his mouth. Helen cut his silence short. Emily knows. She provided the signature. You signed her name out with help. Mark shifted uncomfortably. He spoke in measured tones. There's a context. It was meant to protect the family. Helen looked at Emily instead. Couldn't you speak up? Stop any of it. Her pain sharpened, gathering like steel. Emily's face broke. She swallowed. I'm sorry. I wasn't brave enough. The confession tumbled free. Mark's coercion. Her fear, her regret. Mark flinched. Helen pushed another binder forward, sliding over evidence of Mark's emails. Explicit instructions to structure a trust. Hide transfers. Exclude Helen. He swallowed. Emily's voice cracked. He told me I had to do it to keep the family together. I thought I hated him. But I was scared. Helen's breath caught. The betrayal stung deeper. Deception wrapped in love. Mark's posture collapsed. He tried denying again. You misunderstand. Helen shook her head. We have records, timelines, conversations. She pointed at the binder. You structured this to silence me. You turned me into a liability. Emily wept quietly. Mark sat in awful quiet. Helen paused. She tried to find empathy inside the rage. Could forgiveness live here? She pressed on. If you want redemption, Emily, it starts with truth, ongoing honesty, demonstrated over time. Nothing less. Emily nodded, tears traveling across her cheeks. I'll do that. I'll prove it. But only if you give me a chance. Helen exhaled. This wasn't closure. It was opening a possibility. I'm not giving you my trust. Not yet. But I can give you a pathway. Mark stayed silent, face pale. In that stillness, power shifted. Courtroom scene. The courtroom was hushed when Helen entered the next morning. She carried evidence in neat stacks. Mark and Emily sat together, faces strained. Helen walked to the witness stand, clipboard ready. Robert stood beside her. The judge watched closely. Helen's opening statement rang clear. This was never just a refinance. It was a calculated runaround, designed to exclude me, monetize my contributions, and silence my ownership. She laid out the sequence: original cosign deed, removal clause, offshore trust, third-party involvement, and Emily's confession. Mark's attorney objected, claiming gifts and goodwill. The judge granted. Helen stayed composed, emotion aligned with evidence. Robert delivered the detailed legal case: fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, elimination of joint ownership, the trust hidden under Emily's name flagged as attempt to conceal. Mid-trial, Emily took the stand. Her apology echoed, raw, honest. She described Mark's pressure, her fear and her guilt. She asked Helen to hear her, not just judge her. Helen watched her daughter, seeing both the person she raised and the woman who deserted her. Judgment. After closing arguments, the judge withdrew. Helen waited, heart torn. Minutes later he returned. The court finds in favor of Helen Whitaker. Title is reinstated solely to her. However, in light of Emily's testimony and remorse, ownership may be shared, provided she completes a probationary fiduciary review. Damages awarded in full. Helen exhaled deeply. Victory on paper, but her heart weighed heavier. Emily wept quietly, relief mixed with sorrow. Afterwards, outside the court, Helen sat on a bench framed by sunlit justice-stamped windows. Emily approached, tentative, voice low. "Mom, I know this isn't closure, but if you allow me to prove myself." Helen folded the verdict in her purse. She looked up, searching the older woman inside. Finally she said quietly, "I'm tired of pretending this can all go back, but maybe you can start earning your way forward." Emily nodded, tears falling freely. One last hug, long, wordless. Helen rested her forehead to Emily's. She closed her eyes. Tears weren't absent. Neither was resolve. Helen walked away from the courthouse with the world watching, but her phone chimed with a new message. A single line from Robert. "They've filed an appeal, and the trust fund dotted your name as beneficiary anyway." Helen looked up at the sky, uncertain yet unwavering. The next round was coming, and she was ready. It was over, but I was just beginning to rebuild. The road ahead was long, but for the first time in years, I was free to live on my own terms. The sun was low as Helen stepped onto her porch for the first time without dread. With the appeal looming, the legal fight wasn't quite finished, but the heavier chains had fallen. Holding the house deed again felt different now, soft in the sunlight, a boundary she had reaffirmed. Inside, the living room still smelled of home but no longer of heartbreak. She cleared off the coffee table of files and letters. A single vase held fresh daisies, simple, unstripped. She placed them beside a stack of journals, her story in ink, now ready for the next chapter. Emily's call had come earlier that day. "May I come by?" Helen paused, fingers still. It had been 6 weeks since court. She glanced at the verdict envelope on her desk. Flexible ownership granted. If Emily proved consistent, then she nodded, as if the movement unlocked something inside. When Emily arrived, she brought a jar of homemade jam, something from Sunday mornings and safe places. Helen accepted it, but didn't invite her in. Instead, they sat on folding chairs on the porch, sunlight settling between them. There wasn't much to say. Emily spoke quietly, about struggles managing guilt, about Mark leaving weeks ago, about attending therapy she'd never asked her mother's permission for. Helen listened. The words weren't enough yet, but sincerity, raw and imperfect, floated on the afternoon breeze. As evening neared, Emily stood. "I'll come by next week, maybe help with yard work. The house, I'd like to prove I can contribute." She looked vulnerable. "If you still want me to." Helen exhaled slowly. She measured the moment. "There's a way forward, but not as before." She cleared her voice. "You help with the house. You show me over months. Truth beyond words. Integrity, not justification." Emily nodded. "I'll do that." A soft smile touched Helen's lips. Not regretful, only quiet acknowledgement that rebuilding wasn't a sprint. Inside later, Helen sat at her kitchen table, working on new plans. She'd withdrawn money from the sale reserve to fund a small renovation, painting the guest room, replacing dated carpets. Not extravagant, the kind of updates she'd dreamed of for herself. She scribbled in her journal, "I deserve this peace." Monday she visited a community center downtown and signed up as a volunteer financial counselor for older women, teaching budgeting and self-protection. Her past became purpose, a way to pay forward what she'd learned the hard way. Her phone buzzed mid-writing. It was Emily. "Hope you had a good night. I'm planting those daisies in memory of what we once were." Helen paused. A tear slipped. "Grief alive, but gentle," she replied. "Thank you. I'll water them tomorrow." Over the following weekends, Emily showed up with tools and gloves. They worked side by side. Helen trimming the jasmine vine, Emily painting a window frame. No forced chatter, just presence. One morning, Helen found an envelope taped under her magnolia tree. Inside was a card in Emily's careful handwriting. "Mom, I know I can't undo the past, but I hope you see me choosing a different path, always." Helen walked to the tree and looked up at the thick branches, waiting still, budding quietly. She pressed the card to her chest and smiled through tears. That evening, she opened the verdict letter again. Court actions, still pending appeal, but she realized it wasn't about them anymore. She'd reclaimed something harder than property, her dignity, her narrative. Her phone chimed once more. It was a letter from Robert marked final documents. She opened it to find the trust structure officially dissolved, control consolidated, ownership confirmed in her name, appeal dropped, a quiet legal ending. She saved the letter with her journal, then stood and walked to the front window, watching her house glow in the sunset. She felt anchored. As Helen closed the front door behind her and stepped into her garden, she whispered to the magnolia tree, "I was just rebuilding, but I've remembered who I am."